My name is Olatuyin Adi from Ilarin Queer State, Nigeria. For 12 years, I was a midnight ritual coordinator in a witchcraft coven. My specific assignment was to identify and neutralize Christian worship. I was trained to monitor the spiritual atmosphere of entire neighborhoods, especially during the hours of midnight and the early morning, and to disrupt any form of prayer or praise that threatened our operations. I attended more midnight rituals than I can count. I destroyed more Christian homes than I want to remember. But Jesus Christ set me free. And now I am going to tell you something that I was forbidden from ever sharing with anyone outside the coven. There are 3 hymns that made our entire operation go into chaos whenever a Christian sang them at midnight. Not just any songs, not random worship music. These specific hymns, when I say we would lose control, I mean exactly that. Our assignments would scatter. Our monitoring spirits would lose their position. Our coordinators would call emergency meetings in the middle of our own rituals because something had gone so wrong with an operation that we could not recover it. These 3 hymns were feared in our coven at a level I cannot fully explain in human language. But I am going to try. If you have been struggling with interrupted prayers, with spiritual attacks that seem to intensify at night, with breakthroughs that keep slipping away just before they arrive, with a heaviness that settles over you, specifically in the late evening hours when the world gets quiet, then what I am about to share is going to give you a weapon you did not know you had. Something simple, something old, something that was carrying spiritual authority, long before any of us ever understood why. I also want to address something that some viewers ask when they hear testimonies like mine. They ask whether I am exaggerating, whether this is more symbolic than literal, whether what I am describing is metaphor rather than reality. I understand the question. I asked similar questions in the years after my deliverance when I was trying to make sense of everything I had participated in. What I can tell you is this. The assignments we ran were not symbolic. The families we targeted experienced real disruptions in their finances, their health, their relationships. The breakthroughs that were delayed were real delays. The pain that was manufactured through our operations was real pain. And the hymns that dismantled those operations produced real breakthroughs. Mrs. Adonola's business really recovered. Mama Patience's family really came out of that compound singing. Sister Victoria's wound really closed. These were not feelings or impressions. These were outcomes that changed people's lives. I know because I was watching, and I watched when our operations succeeded, and I watched when they failed. Stay with me until the end of this testimony, because the last hymn I am going to share is the one that caused us the most damage, and I will tell you exactly what it did to our operations and why. The first hymn, It Is Well With My Soul. Before I get into the stories, let me explain something about how we operated. But first, I need to say this. I have been asked many times since my deliverance why I am willing to expose these things. Why I would take information that the kingdom of darkness considers highly classified and bring it into the open. The answer is simple. I spent 20 years destroying Christian homes with this knowledge. I broke up marriages. I buried destinies. I delayed breakthroughs. And most of the people I attacked had no idea what was happening to them because nobody had told them. They thought they were just going through hard times. They thought God was testing them. They did not know that what they were experiencing was a coordinated and intentional operation run by people who had studied their weaknesses and were executing a deliberate plan. Every person watching this video right now deserves to know what is being done to them and how to stop it. That is why I speak. And what I am about to share about these 3 hymns is something that every Christian who has ever struggled with breakthrough in prayer needs to hear, because the weapon was in the hymn book the whole time. It was in the songs grandmothers used to sing in small churches before any of us were born. It has always been there. We just need to understand why it works and use it with intention. In our coven, every witch was assigned to specific Christians in a specific territory. My territory was a section of Elorin. I had a team of spiritual agents who worked under me. Our job was to monitor, track, and disrupt. We monitored prayer patterns. we tracked spiritual growth, and we disrupted anything that threatened the assignments we had placed on people's lives. The most powerful weapon in our arsenal was not any specific curse or ritual. It was chaos. We created chaos in people's lives, and then we used the chaos to introduce doubt, fear, and ultimately spiritual surrender. When a Christian's life fell apart, they usually stopped praying as aggressively. They started asking questions about whether God was real, whether He was good, whether He cared. And that window of doubt was when we could do our deepest work. This is why the hymn, "It is Well With My Soul," was so dangerous to us. This hymn was written in the deepest possible human suffering. The man who wrote had just received news that all 4 of his daughters had drowned at sea. In the middle of that devastation, he wrote words of absolute unshakable peace. He declared that it was well with his soul, not because his circumstances were well, but because his soul was anchored to something that circumstances could not touch. When a Christian sang this hymn at midnight from a genuine place of faith, especially in the middle of difficult circumstances, it did something to the spiritual atmosphere that we had no defense against. It activated a dimension of peace that was not human. And peace, true peace, is the one thing that destroys everything we try to build. We built our operations on disturbance, on unrest, on the feeling that something was wrong, that danger was coming, that stability was a lie. When someone sang "It Is Well" at midnight and meant it, the entire foundation of what we had constructed around their life began to crack. I need you to understand something else about this hymn, and why it specifically worked at midnight. We operated most aggressively in the late night hours. Not because of any arbitrary superstition about midnight, but because this is the hour when the human mind is most susceptible to negative thought patterns. When the house is quiet, when there is no noise to distract, when the body is tired, and the defenses of the conscious mind are lowered. That is when fear becomes loudest, when doubt feels most rational, when grief feels most crushing. We use the midnight hour as a force multiplier. The same attack that would produce moderate anxiety during the day would produce overwhelming fear at midnight. When a Christian sang this hymn at midnight, they were choosing to bring their highest declaration of faith into the exact hour we had chosen for our most intensive work. It was a direct confrontation. And the genuine peace that was activated in that moment was not just an emotional state. It was a spiritual weapon that operated in the same frequency as our midnight attacks, and it killed them. Let me tell you about a woman named Mrs. Adonola Fishola in my territory. Mrs. Adonola was a trader. She sold fabric in the market. She had a husband, 3 children, and a small but steady income. She was also a deeply praying woman. And because of that, she had been flagged by our coven as a priority target. We had been working on Mrs. Adonola for about 8 months. Our strategy was simple. We attacked her finances first. Sales began to drop. Customers who had been loyal for years suddenly stopped coming. A large order she was counting on fell through. Then we moved to her marriage. We introduced confusion and small misunderstandings that escalated into arguments she could not explain. Husband, a quiet man, began to withdraw from her. Then we touched her health. Nothing life-threatening, just a persistent tiredness that made everything harder. A pain in her back that would not go away. We had done this to hundreds of people. The pattern was reliable. After 3 to 4 months of simultaneous pressure on finances, marriage and health, most people would begin to pull back from aggressive prayer. They would still attend church. They might still read their Bible. But the midnight prayers, the intense petitions, the declarations at Trandio in the morning, those would slow down and eventually stop. And when the praying stopped, we could finalize our work. But Mrs. Adonola did something we did not anticipate. Instead of pulling back, she began waking up at midnight every single night. She would sit on the floor of her small bedroom with a candle because sometimes the electricity was off. She would read the Bible for 30 minutes and then she would sing, not loudly. Her children were sleeping. She would sing quietly, almost in a whisper. And one of the songs she sang almost every night was, "It Is Well With My Soul." I want you to understand what happened in the spiritual realm when she did that. I need to give you the context of what this looked like from my position of monitoring. When we place an assignment on a Christian household, It does not exist as a vague spiritual cloud. It exists as a structured set of coordinated pressures, each one connected to the others, each one designed to reinforce the others. The financial pressure is not random. It is timed to coincide with the relational pressure, so that when the person is already arguing with their spouse, the money problem adds extra weight. The health issue is introduced when the person is already emotionally depleted by both the financial and relational strain, making it feel like the final evidence that everything is against them. What we were building in Mrs. Adonola's life was a structure, and like any structure, it had foundations and load-bearing elements. If you could identify and attack the right structural element, the whole thing would come down. But we had built these structures carefully over many years of practice. We knew how to make them resilient. We knew how to reinforce them when they started to weaken. What Mrs. Adonola's midnight singing did was something our structures had no defense against. It was not attacking the structure from the outside. It was changing the ground underneath it. A tight, carefully constructed net of spiritual pressure designed to slowly tighten until everything inside it collapsed. When Mrs. Adonola began singing that hymn at midnight with genuine faith, it was like something began cutting the ropes of that net. Not violently, not dramatically, but steadily. Each night more of what we had built would loosen. Each night the spiritual weight we had placed on her home would reduce. I reported this to my superior. She told me to increase the pressure. We sent more chaos. The husband's employer announced layoffs. One of the children became sick. A conflict erupted between Mrs. Adonola and her closest friend. She kept singing every midnight in her small room quietly. It is well with my soul. After 6 weeks of this, our entire 8-month operation collapsed. The assignments we had placed over her finances, her marriage, her health, all of them were neutralized. Her sales began to recover. Her husband came back to himself. Her child recovered. The conflict with her friend was resolved. And in our coven meeting afterward, the senior coordinators had an emergency discussion about this woman. Not because what happened was unusual. It was not unusual. It had happened before. They had to discuss it because it kept happening. Every time we encountered a Christian who sang this specific hymn at midnight, from a genuine place of peace, our operations against them would eventually unravel. I want to add something to this story that I remember very clearly. In the emergency meeting after the Adonola operation collapsed, one of the senior coordinators asked a question that I have never forgotten. She asked, "What is the difference between the Christians whose peace breaks our operations and the Christians whose peace does not?" Because there were Christians who sang the same hymn and their peace did not produce the same results. What was different? The answer that came from the most senior member of our coven leadership was this: the difference is whether they are singing the truth or hoping for the truth. A Christian who sings it is well because they genuinely trust God is operating from covenant. A Christian who sings it hoping it will make them feel better is operating from desire. Covenant has legal standing in the spirit realm, desire does not. What disrupts our operations is not the sound of the hymn. It is the genuine faith behind the sound. The faith that says my soul is held by God, and this storm cannot touch what God is holding. That distinction changed how I understood everything about spiritual warfare. She said this hymn touches a covenant, the covenant of peace. And when that covenant is activated, our access to that person is cut off at the root. Do not just watch this video and move on. Participate right now. Before I continue, I want you to do something specific. Go to the comment section below this video and write these words. My peace is the covenant the enemy cannot cross. Write it. Post it. Because when you make that declaration publicly, you are activating something. You are planting a stake in the spiritual ground around your life. And the testimonies I have seen in this community when people participate like this are extraordinary. Take 20 seconds. Write it now. I will be here when you come back. The second story I want to share about this hymn involves a family that had just experienced a devastating loss. The Okono family lived at the edge of my territory. They were a large family, very close, multiple generations living in the same compound. The father, a man I will call Brother Emmanuel, was a committed believer. His mother, an elderly woman named Mama Patience, had prayed over that compound for more than 40 years. One year, the family suffered a sudden and unexpected loss. A young man in the family, Emmanuel's nephew, died in an accident. He was 24 years old. The grief in that compound was severe and understandable. Our coven saw this as an opportunity. Grief is one of the main doors we use to enter Christian homes, not because grief is wrong. Grief is natural and even holy. But deep grief, when left unguarded, creates a spiritual vulnerability that is extremely useful to the kingdom of darkness. When people are grieving intensely, they sometimes step back from active prayer. The pain becomes so overwhelming that the very act of approaching God can feel too difficult. We call this spiritual exhaustion, induced through sorrow. But there was another layer to what we were doing with the Okono family. We were not just trying to induce spiritual exhaustion. We were trying to use the young man's death as an accusation against God. This is one of our most sophisticated operations. We find a genuine tragedy, one that God allowed for reasons that no human being fully understands, and we whisper around the edges of it. We whisper, where was God when this happened? If God is good, why did he not stop this? How can you trust a God who lets a 24-year-old die without warning? If we can turn a person's grief into an accusation against God's character, we have accomplished something that simple attacks on finances or health could never achieve. We have damaged the root of their faith. And when the root is damaged, everything built on it becomes vulnerable. We assigned 3 spiritual agents to that compound after the burial. Their job was to deepen the grief, to extend it, to transform healthy mourning into something that would root into bitterness, anger at God, and eventually withdrawal from faith. For the first 2 weeks, the assignment was progressing exactly as planned. But on the 15th night after the burial, Mama Patience did something. She was old. She had been crying for 2 weeks. Her body was tired and her heart was broken. But that night, in the middle of the compound, under the open sky, she began to sing, old and slow, and grieving and real. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. I need to stop here and explain something about what made this moment spiritually decisive. It was not just the hymn. It was the combination of factors. Mama Patience was in genuine grief. She was not pretending the pain was not real. She was not performing courage she did not feel. She was an old woman who was broken by the loss of a grandson she had loved and prayed over for 24 years. And in the middle of that genuine, unperformed grief, she chose to make a declaration about the status of her soul. That combination, real grief plus genuine faith, is something we had almost no experience defeating. Grief alone was something we could use. Faith alone, when it was a kind of performance or a reflex of religious habit, we could work around. But grief that had not denied itself, that had not pretended to be okay, combined with faith that had chosen to declare God's goodness anyway, that combination produced a quality of worship that was beyond our reach. The moment her voice hit the words, "Whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul." The 3 spiritual agents we had placed on that compound scattered. They did not slowly retreat. They scattered as if something had struck them with a force they could not withstand. I was monitoring the operation from the spiritual level when it happened. I felt the disturbance. I tried to redirect our agents. They could not re-enter the compound while the song was being sung. And then the family members who were watching through windows and doorways began to join her. One by one, Emmanuel's children, his wife, his brothers and sisters, they came out of their rooms and into the compound, and they stood with Mama Patience under the night sky, and they sang. Our entire operation on that family was finished in one night. What Mama Patience understood, what she had learned through 70 years of prayer, was that singing this hymn in the middle of grief was not denial of pain. It was a declaration of something deeper than pain. It was a declaration that the soul had an anchor the enemy could not reach. And when that anchor was activated through singing at midnight, we could not touch them. The second hymn, How Great Thou Art, If It Is Well With My Soul, was the hymn that destroyed our individual assignments against people. Then How Great Thou Art was the hymn that threatened our territorial operations. Let me explain what I mean by territorial operations. In our coven, individual assignments against Pacific Christians were handled by lower level agents, but there was a higher level of work that senior coordinators managed, and that was territorial control. Every geographic area has spiritual atmosphere. That atmosphere can be influenced by the dominant spiritual activity in the region. A neighborhood where there is a great deal of genuine worship and prayer will have a different spiritual atmosphere than a neighborhood where there is not. I want you to understand how much effort we invested in maintaining territorial heaviness. It was not passive. It was not something that happened automatically. We had to actively work to maintain the density. This is why consistent midnight prayer from Christians in a neighborhood was such a threat. It was not just that individual prayers would disrupt individual assignments. Consistent midnight prayer had the potential to alter the baseline spiritual atmosphere of an entire area. And if the baseline shifted, our entire regional operation would have to be restructured. Our methods for maintaining territorial heaviness included amplifying division between churches, feeding the conflicts between Christian leaders, so that they were too busy fighting each other to fill the midnight hours with corporate prayer, introducing entertainment and distraction that kept Christians busy and comfortable rather than watchful, and placing specific spiritual weights over locations where breakthrough prayer might emerge. We were deliberate and strategic about atmospheric maintenance. How Great Thou Art is a throne room hymn. When it is sung with genuine awe, with a real revelation of the magnitude and majesty of who God is, it does not just touch the individual, it affects the atmosphere. It is as though the singing tears open the spiritual canopy over a location and allow something from a different realm to pour through. The awareness of divine presence that accompanies sincere singing of this hymn at midnight is something our spirits could not endure. I will tell you about a pastor in Ilorin whose midnight singing of this hymn disrupted our territorial operations in his entire neighborhood for a period of close to 3 months. His name was Pastor James Akande. He led a small church with less than 100 members. By any external measure, he was not a significant threat to our operations. His church was small. His influence was limited. He did not have a television program or a large social media following. He was simply a man who loved God and prayed with seriousness. Pastor James had a habit that one of our monitoring spirits discovered early on. Every night at midnight, he would wake up, go to the front room of his house, and spend 1 hour in prayer. He would start with scripture reading, then move into intercession, and somewhere in the middle of his midnight hour, he would sing, How Great Thou Art. The first time our monitoring spirit reported this, the supervisor dismissed it. One man singing in his living room was not considered a serious threat. But after a few weeks, the monitoring spirit came back with a troubling report. The spiritual atmosphere in a 3-street radius around Pastor James's house was becoming difficult to work in. In our operations, there is something we call atmospheric density. It refers to how thick the spiritual heaviness is in a given area. The denser and heavier the atmosphere, the easier our worker. When Pastor James would sing How Great Thou Art at midnight, the atmospheric density his immediate neighborhood would drop significantly, not permanently. But for several hours after his midnight session, our agents working in that area were operating in a thinner, less favorable environment. Our coven leadership decided to send a specialist to deal with him, someone trained specifically in neutralizing Christian worship at the atmospheric level. The specialist made 3 attempts to disrupt Pastor James's midnight routine. First, by causing physical disturbances, noises outside, a disturbance with a neighbor, something that would bring him outside and break the rhythm of his prayer. Pastor James would return inside and simply continue. Second, by introducing a dream pattern designed to make him feel that his prayers were ineffective, that God was not listening, that his midnight vigils were producing nothing. He would wake up, shake it off, and still go to his front room at midnight. Third, by attacking his health with persistent fatigue that made waking at midnight increasingly difficult. He began to set 2 alarms instead of 1, and he still woke up. After 3 months, the specialist reported back that Pastor James could not be disrupted. I want to tell you something about the specialist's final report that has stayed with me. She said that every time she attempted to disrupt his midnight session, something would happen to her own assignment that she could not explain. She said it was as though trying to get close to him while he was singing would cause her own operational parameters to destabilize. Her assignments in other parts of the territory would begin to malfunction when she was focused on disrupting him. It was as though the spiritual field he was generating was not just protecting him, but pushing back against anything connected to our operations in the region. This is something we called spiritual blowback. It was rare. We had encountered it before, but only with the most advanced intercessors, people who had been praying for decades and had built up enormous spiritual authority. To encounter it in a small church pastor who had no special reputation for extraordinary faith was unexpected and troubling. And in the area around his house, we had lost almost all atmospheric control. The heaviness had lifted significantly. Other assignments we had maintained in that neighborhood for years were destabilizing. Christians in nearby homes were beginning to pray more aggressively. A woman 2 streets over who had not attended church in 3 years suddenly returned. A couple whose marriage we had been systematically destroying experienced a breakthrough that our agents could not explain. 1 midnight session at a time, 1 hymn at a time, Pastor James had altered the spiritual atmosphere of his entire street. I want you to understand this. The hymn, How Great Thou Art, when sung with genuine revelation of who God is, does not just produce a feeling. It produces an atmospheric shift. It tears a hole in the spiritual canopy of heaviness that the enemy tries to maintain over Christian homes and neighborhoods. And when that canopy is torn, everything the enemy builds underneath it begins to destabilize. If what I am sharing today is opening your eyes to dimensions of warfare you have never understood before, do not keep it to yourself. Take a moment right now and share this video with someone in your life who is struggling spiritually, someone whose prayers feel blocked, someone who is fighting a battle they cannot understand. They need this weapon. It costs you nothing to share, and it may cost them everything if they never receive it. I want to tell you about the second case involving this hymn. This one involved not an individual, but a church prayer team. There was a church in my territory that had recently formed a midnight prayer team. Every Friday at midnight, a group of believers would gather in the church building to intercede. They called themselves the Night Watchmen. Our coven assigned a full team to disrupt this group. We knew from experience that sustained midnight intercession by a group was far more dangerous than individual prayer. The combined faith and unity of multiple Christians praying together at midnight created a spiritual force that was significantly more powerful than the sum of individual efforts. We needed to stop this group before it became established. We began by targeting key members of the team. We attacked their families, their jobs, their health. We tried to create conflicts within the group by amplifying small personality differences into major offenses. We seeded doubts about whether midnight prayer was even necessary or effective. For the first 6 weeks, we were making some progress. 2 members of the team had stopped attending due to circumstances we created. 3 more were wavering. The group was shrinking. But on the 7th Friday, something changed in the midnight session. One of the founding members of the group, a woman named Sister Grace, had been reading about the history of this hymn. She had learned about the man who wrote it and what he was going through when he wrote it. And that night she led the group in singing How Great Thou Art before they began their intercession slowly, reverently, as an act of deliberate worship before the work of prayer. When that group of 7 people, reduced from 12, began singing that hymn together at midnight, with that level of intention and revelation, the effect on our operations was catastrophic. Every assignment we had placed against each of the 7 individuals who were present collapsed simultaneously. 7 separate operations, 7 separate sets of agents, all destabilized in the same moment by that one act of corporate midnight worship. The report that came back to our coven leadership triggered a crisis meeting. What we had encountered was something called synchronized atmospheric breakthrough. When multiple believers with unified hearts sing this hymn together at midnight, the effect is not additive. It is exponential. 7 people singing together do not produce 7 times the disruption. They produce something that cannot be quantified by multiplication. Our leadership decided to abandon the operation against that prayer group. The cost of fighting them was too high. We redirected our resources elsewhere. The night watchmen had no idea they had won. They were just a small group in a small church singing an old hymn at midnight because they loved God and wanted to intercede. But in the spirit realm, they had routed an entire coordinated operation without knowing it. That is why I want to tell you about something called the Day Breakthrough Protocol. It is a complete system designed to identify and close every spiritual door in your life. It is 21 days of targeted prayers, 21 days of strategic declarations, 21 days of systematic deliverance from the 7 main assignments that were most commonly used against Christians when I was operating in darkness. This protocol was developed by believers who understand spiritual warfare at the deepest level. And I myself went through this protocol after my deliverance. It was part of my own healing process, learning how to recognize and close every door I had ever opened, both personally and on behalf of others. The link is in the description. Do not wait until January to start your breakthrough. The enemy is not waiting. Why should you? The third hymn. What a friend we have in Jesus. This is the hymn I did not want to talk about tonight. Not because I am afraid. I am free now and I fear nothing that belongs to the kingdom I left. But this hymn is the one that exposed the deepest and most sophisticated layer of what we were doing to Christians. And explaining it means I have to admit some things about the level of our access that I find difficult to describe even now. When I was in the coven, one of my primary tools was a class of spiritual agents we called trackers. Their function was not to attack, not directly. Their function was to monitor, to stay close to a Christian and report everything, their conversations, their emotional state, their prayer life, their faith level, their relationships. Think of it like spiritual intelligence gathering. The information collected by trackers was then used by other agents to time their attacks perfectly. When a Christian was at their lowest, when their faith was wavering, when they were tired or hurt or confused, that was when the attack operations were launched. Trackers made our attacks precise. They made them surgical. And the one thing that would completely destroy a tracking assignment was a Christian genuinely singing, "What a friend we have in Jesus." Let me explain why. This hymn is fundamentally about intimate access to God. Its entire message is that the believer has a direct, personal, constant friend in Jesus who is aware of every burden, every need, every tear. When a Christian sings this hymn and truly believes what they are singing, it does something specific in the spiritual realm. It activates what I can only describe as divine monitoring. The awareness of God's presence becomes so real and so close that our tracking spirits cannot operate in that same space. Here is the spiritual law we were working with on our side. Trackers operate best in spiritual darkness or distance. The further a Christian feels from God, the more effectively our trackers can work. When a person feels alone, when they feel that their prayers are going nowhere, when the sense of divine presence is dull or absent, trackers can move very close and operate with great precision. But when a Christian sings this hymn with genuine faith, with the actual conviction that Jesus is walking beside them right now, knowing every burden, bearing every grief, the divine presence that is activated is so bright in the spirit realm that our trackers have to retreat. They cannot function near that level of divine intimacy. And the more consistently a Christian sings this hymn at midnight, the more permanently the trackers are pushed back. After a few weeks of consistent midnight singing of this hymn with genuine faith, the trackers assigned to that person would lose their position entirely and have to be reassigned. The intelligence gathering that made our attack so precise would be cut off. Without tracker intelligence, our operations became clumsy and imprecise. Attacks would be launched at the wrong time. Operations would target areas the person had already overcome. We were essentially fighting blind. This is why this hymn was more feared in our coven than any other. It did not just resist our attacks. It dismantled our intelligence infrastructure. Let me tell you about Mama Theodora. Mama Theodora was an elderly woman in my territory who lived alone. Her children had grown and moved to other cities. She was widowed. She lived in a small house and attended a neighborhood church. By all external measures, she was not a significant target. But she had been flagged by our monitoring spirits very early because of the level of genuine intimacy she carried with God. Even in her simplicity, even in her quiet daily life, there was something about the quality of her faith that our monitoring spirits reported as extremely bright in the spiritual realm. Her grandchildren visited periodically. Two of them, a teenage boy and a teenage girl, had been targeted by our coven for specific long-term assignments related to their futures. We had placed tracking operations on both grandchildren to gather the intelligence we needed to time our operations against them correctly. For 3 months, we gathered information. We knew the boys' fears. We knew the girls' weaknesses. We were ready to begin the actual assignment operations. Then something changed in Mama Theodora's midnight prayer routine. She had always prayed at midnight, but she added something new. Every night after her prayers, she would sing a short song before going back to sleep. And the song she chose was, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." The first night she sang it, the tracking operations on her grandchildren destabilized slightly. We attributed it to coincidence. The second night, they destabilized further. By the end of the first week, both tracking assignments had completely broken down. We could no longer gather accurate intelligence on either grandchild. Our supervisors were puzzled. The grandchildren were not in the same house. They were not even in the same city. But the tracking assignments against both of them had collapsed at the same time, coinciding precisely with when Mama Theodora began her midnight singing. What we eventually understood was that Mama Theodora's intimate faith, expressed through that hymn, every midnight, was generating a circle of divine protection that extended not just over her house, but over those she was carrying in prayer. The intimacy she was activating in her midnight singing was creating a spiritual field that our tracking spirits could not penetrate even at a distance for people she was holding in prayer. An elderly woman alone in a small house singing an old hymn at midnight, she had no idea she was dismantling coordinated intelligence operations against her grandchildren in 2 different cities. She was just singing because she loved her God and she wanted to feel him near. But in the kingdom of darkness, she was one of the most feared Christians in our territory. The second story about this hymn is about a young woman named Sister Victoria. Victoria was in her mid-20s when I first encountered her assignment file. She had gone through a traumatic experience that I will not describe in detail out of respect for her privacy, but it had left her in a state of deep emotional pain. She was still attending church. She was still reading her Bible. But the trauma had created what we recognized as a door, a spiritual opening created by unhealed pain that we intended to use to access her destiny. Our plan for Victoria was a long-term assignment. We were not in a hurry. We wanted to wait until the pain had settled and hardened, and then use it as a platform to establish specific patterns of thought and behavior that would limit her future. Our tracking assignment on her was operating smoothly for about 5 months. We knew her emotional patterns. We knew what triggered her deepest pain. We knew when she was most vulnerable. We were building a precise map of her interior life that we would use to execute the next phase of the operation. Then, one evening, a woman in Victoria's church gave a teaching about the meaning of the words in What a Friend We Have in Jesus. She walked through each line of the hymn and explained its theological depth. She talked about how Jesus carries the weight that prayer alone expresses. She talked about divine friendship as a daily reality, not just a theological concept. Victoria went home that night and began to sing the hymn. She sang it for a long time. She sang it through her tears. She sang it not because she felt well, but because she was choosing to bring every unhealed part of herself to a friend she could trust. I want to be very precise about what she was doing in the spirit realm because this is important. Victoria was not performing healing. She was not declaring that she was already healed. She was not denying the reality of her pain. She was bringing her pain, fully acknowledged and fully real, to a friend who she was choosing to believe was actually there and actually cared. The theological content of that hymn is specific. It says that we should bring everything to Jesus in prayer. It says that no burden is too small or too personal or too confusing or too painful to bring. And it says that this friend will bear the weight. When she chose to believe that while singing she was making a spiritual transaction, that our tracking assignment had no way to interrupt because the transaction was not between her and her pain. It was between her pain and someone who was outside our reach entirely. This is what I have to tell you about that moment from where I was watching in the spirit realm. Every piece of intelligence our trackers had gathered about Victoria became useless in one night. The pain that we had been cataloging and planning to weaponize against her began to close, not because the pain disappeared immediately, but because something about singing that hymn with genuine intention was routing the pain through a channel of divine grace that was completely outside our reach. We had no access to what was happening between her and the presence she was bringing her pain to. By the end of that night, our tracking assignment on Victoria was inactive. By the end of that week, the door we had identified in her pain was closed. The unhealed wound that we had intended to use as a platform for a long-term operation had been given to someone who healed it in a way no operation of ours could undo. We never successfully established an assignment against Victoria. Our operation file on her was closed and marked as unreoverable, all because she sang an old hymn one night and meant every word. Now I want to bring this all together for you because what I have just shared is not random or coincidental. There is a pattern here that I want you to see clearly. It is well with my soul breaks the assignment of manufactured chaos. When your life is under coordinated pressure, when everything seems to be collapsing at once, this hymn activates the covenant of peace that the enemy has no legal right to violate. It establishes your soul in a dimension that is above your circumstances. And when you sing it with genuine faith at midnight, it cuts the ropes of every assignment that depends on your inner stability collapsing. How great thou art breaks territorial assignments. It does not just affect you, it affects the spiritual atmosphere around you. When you sing this hymn with genuine awe and revelation, it tears the canopy of heaviness that the enemy tries to maintain over your home, your street, your neighborhood. It opens heaven over your location in a way that dismantles enemy operations in an entire radius around where you are standing. What a friend we have in Jesus. Breaks intelligence operations. This hymn activates divine intimacy so powerfully that our tracking spirits cannot function near you. Without their intelligence, enemy attacks become imprecise and ineffective. And when you carry people in prayer while singing this hymn, the protection extends to them as well, regardless of their physical distance from you. 3 hymns, 3 different weapons, 3 different levels of attack that they each destroy. And I want to tell you something that I had to think hard about before sharing in this testimony. The reason these hymns are so powerful is not because they are magic words. It is not because of any musical formula or specific melody. The reason these hymns are powerful is because of what the people who wrote them were experiencing when they wrote them. And what happens when you sing them with that same level of genuine faith? These hymns were written by people who were in real pain, who were facing real loss, who chose in the middle of their devastation to sing the truth about God anyway. And when you sing them with the same quality of faith, not because your circumstances are good, but because your soul is anchored to something that is above circumstances, you tap into a spiritual authority that was forged in human suffering and divine faithfulness. I want to say something else about why midnight specifically matters for these hymns. We already discussed that midnight is the hour the enemy chooses for maximum spiritual impact. But there is a positive dimension to midnight that many Christians never utilize. Midnight is the hour of transition. It is when one day ends and another begins. In the spiritual realm, this transition carries significance. What you speak and sing at midnight has a particular quality of declaration because you are placing your faith at the exact intersection of ending and beginning. You are saying, whatever the previous day held, I am entering the new one with this truth in my mouth. I am greeting the new day with worship, not with fear. I am crossing the threshold of time with the sound of faith, not silence. When we saw Christians actively using midnight as a moment of worship rather than sleeping through it, it fundamentally disrupted our timing strategies. Our most effective attacks were planned for specific transitional moments. Midnight was one of our prime operational windows. When a Christian filled that window with genuine hymns singing, they were not just defending against us, they were claiming the ground we had intended to use. The enemy has no answer for that. We never had an answer for that. We tried for years. We tried. And every time a simple person singing an old hymn at midnight sent everything we built into disorder. If this testimony has brought clarity and weapons to your spiritual warfare, there is an inner circle in this ministry you should know about. It is called the membership, and it exists to keep you covered between videos. There are 3 levels. As an intercessor, your comments are answered first. You have direct connection with me. As a sentinel, you receive early access to new testimonies 24 to 48 hours before anyone else. And as a prayer warrior, you receive exclusive prayer videos every week. Intercession content that only members can access. Content made to keep you covered and armed between videos. These 3 hymns I shared tonight are not the only weapons you have, but the enemy would prefer you never discover the others. The inner circle exists to make sure you stay equipped week by week. Click the join button below this video. Choose your level. Step into the inner circle today. Now, I want to pray with you. This prayer is not a formality. I am asking you to pray this with me right now, out loud, if you can, because there is something that happens when you add your voice to these declarations that silent reading cannot produce. If you are somewhere you can speak quietly, but speak, Father. I come before you tonight with the weapons you have placed in my hands through this testimony. I thank you that you have not left me without armor. I thank you that what the enemy prepared against me has already been seen by you, and you have already placed the answer in a song. I declare tonight that my soul is anchored. Whatever manufactured chaos has been released against my life, whatever coordinated pressure has been applied to my finances, my marriage, my health, my children, I sing the declaration of Horatio Spafford over every storm. It is well with my soul, not because my circumstances are well, but because my soul is held by hands that no assignment can pry it from. Every chaos assignment against my life is dismantled now in the name of Jesus. Every plan designed to use my difficulties to produce spiritual surrender is exposed and destroyed. I am not a person who collapses under pressure. I am a person who sings in it. And when I sing in it, the enemy's net over my life becomes loose and falls away. I declare tonight that the atmosphere over my life is shifting. I sing the throne room hymn of my King. How great thou art over every territory I occupy. Over my home, the atmosphere of heaven is descending. Over my street, over the lives of my children, over every location connected to my destiny, the heavy canopy of spiritual oppression is being torn open right now by the presence of the Most High God. Every territorial assignment against my neighborhood, every coordinated heaviness that has settled over my immediate world is shattered now by the declaration of divine majesty. My God is sovereign over every square inch of space I inhabit, and every spirit that has been assigned to maintain heaviness over my territory is scattered right now in the name of Jesus. I declare tonight that I am known by my friend. I bring every wound, every unhealed place, every pain that has been waiting to be used as a door against me, and I bring it to the one who knows it better than I do. Jesus, I declare that you are my friend tonight. You are walking beside me right now. You know every burden I carry, and I am choosing to trust you with the weight of every one of them. Every tracking assignment against my life is destroyed. Every piece of intelligence gathered by monitoring spirits, every map of my weaknesses and vulnerabilities they have spent months constructing is obsolete tonight, because my God knows me better than any spirit sent to study me, and his knowledge of me is my protection. I speak over my children tonight. I speak over my grandchildren. I speak over every person I carry in prayer. The protection I am activating through genuine faith is not limited by distance. What is covered in heaven is covered on earth. My family is covered. My bloodline is covered. The assignments against the next generation in my family are broken now in the name of Jesus. I am not a passive recipient of whatever the enemy decides to do with my life. I am a worshiper. And when I worship, the kingdom of darkness has no authority in my atmosphere. Tonight, I choose to worship. Tonight, I choose to sing. Tonight, I take the weapon I was given tonight, and I use it in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
You just prayed something that the enemy hoped you would never pray. Take a moment to receive that. If this testimony reached you and brought something new into your spiritual arsenal, I want to ask you to help us reach more believers who are still fighting battles they do not have weapons for. You can support this mission with super thanks. Look for the heart icon with a $sign in it right below this video on the right side. Every contribution helps us continue exposing the enemy's strategies and equipping believers with the weapons of breakthrough. Now I want to give you practical steps because a testimony without action is just a story. These hymns are only weapons when you use them. For the hymn, "It is Well with My Soul," here is your assignment. Identify the area of your life where there is the most chaos right now. Not the area that has been difficult for a long time. The area where things seem to be collapsing simultaneously and inexplicably. That is the most likely target of a coordinated assignment. Starting tonight at midnight, or as close to midnight as your schedule allows, sing this hymn over that area specifically. You do not have to have a perfect voice. The spiritual authority in this hymn is not in your singing ability. It is in the genuine peace you are choosing to declare in the middle of your storm. Do this for 7 consecutive nights and watch what begins to change. For the hymn, "How Great Thou Art," I want you to think about your neighborhood, not just your house, the street you live on, the community around you. Christians often pray for themselves and their families, but rarely for the spiritual atmosphere of their immediate geography. Starting this week, add a midnight moment where you go to your window or your door and you sing this hymn outward. Sing it toward the street, toward the homes around you. You are not performing. You are not trying to wake anyone up. But there is something about directing worship outward rather than inward that accelerates the atmospheric shift. Even if you live in an apartment and your window only faces a parking lot, sing toward that space. You are tearing a canopy over real territory. For the hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus," I want you to think about one person in your life right now who is in a spiritually vulnerable position, someone whose faith is wavering, someone who's going through something that has made them spiritually distant, and I want you to carry them with you into your midnight session. Sing this hymn while holding them in your heart and your prayers. You do not need to understand all the mechanics of what happens spiritually when you do this. Mama Theodora did not understand the mechanics. She just loved her grandchildren and sang her faith in the night. The results belong to God. Your job is to participate in the singing. One more practical step that applies to all 3 hymns. Do not wait until you feel like singing. The people who wrote these hymns did not feel like singing when they wrote them. That is the entire point. The authority in these hymns is specifically activated by the choice to worship, when the natural inclination is silence or complaint. If you only sing when you feel worshipful, you are using your voice as a thermometer to measure your current emotional temperature. If you sing when you do not feel like it, you are using your voice as a weapon to create a spiritual reality that does not yet match your feelings. That is the difference between worship as expression and worship as warfare. Let me also say this about consistency. One night of midnight singing is better than no nights. But it is the consistency that breaks the back of long-term assignments. Mrs. Adonola sang for 6 weeks before the operation against her completely collapsed. Mama Theodora prayed and sang for months before our tracking assignments on her grandchildren were permanently destroyed. I am not telling you this to discourage you. I am telling you this because the enemy counts on you stopping. The enemy's strategy in the face of effective midnight worship is almost always patience. He waits for you to grow tired, to skip a night, to lose motivation, to decide it is not working. If you stop, he rebuilds. If you continue, he cannot. The most powerful word in spiritual warfare is not a declaration or a scripture. It is the word again. You prayed last night. Good. Pray again tonight. You sang last week. Good. Sing again this week. The enemy has no strategy for the Christian who simply refuses to stop. Every morning that you wake up and choose to participate in this midnight warfare one more time, something in the spirit realm is preserved and strengthened that the enemy cannot undo. Be that person. Make it tonight. Make it again tomorrow. Before I share my final words tonight, I need to ask you to do one thing. Take this video and share it with 2 people. Not because we need views, but because somewhere in your contact list, there is a person who is under a coordinated assignment and they have no idea. There is a believer whose midnight hours are empty, and the enemy is using that emptiness. There is a grandmother who needs to know that the old hymns she learned as a child are not just sentiment, they are weapons. You know who that person is. You thought of someone when I said that. Send them this video tonight. That act of sharing is also an act of warfare. And if you have not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now and turn on the notifications. Every week I bring testimonies that are designed to be training, not just inspiration. Spiritual warfare is a real battle, and you need real intelligence to fight it effectively. This channel exists to give you that intelligence. I want to close with a declaration that I want you to make your own tonight. Say this out loud, right where you are, and mean every word. I am a worshipper, and my worship is a weapon. Every assignment against my life breaks when I sing. Every operation of darkness in my atmosphere collapses when I lift my voice in genuine faith. I will not be silent at midnight. I will not let the night pass without filling it with the sound of my trust in God. The enemy fears my voice, and from tonight, I will give him reason to fear it more. My name is Oluwatin Admi. For 20 years, I served darkness, and I know precisely how it operates. I have sat in the emergency meetings when our operations failed. I have heard the frustration of senior coordinators who could not explain why certain Christians kept breaking free. I have seen the reports and I know what caused them. And what I know is this: the most dangerous Christian on earth is not the loudest, not the most theologically trained, not the most powerful by any external measure. The most dangerous Christian is the one who sings at midnight, the one who fills the dark hours with old hymns and genuine faith. The enemy has no strategy for that person. We never did, and we never will. Sing tonight. Sing tomorrow night. Sing until the atmosphere over your life changes, because it will. God bless you and keep.